It wasn't hard. It just wasn't hard. The game fell in easy for me. I tried to hit a shot, I'd hit it. I don't know where it came from. I have no clue.
The truth is, at 85, Lee Trevino is still the most dangerous man golf has ever produced. Not dangerous in the way we talk about Jack Nicklaus or Tiger Woods. Not dangerous because of a perfect swing or a flawless short game. Dangerous because of what was underneath all of it. Because the real Lee Trevino was never the laughing, joking entertainer the cameras loved. He was something far colder, far more calculated. And for decades, the sport was happy to hide it. The galleries adored him, the broadcasters celebrated him, and all the while the men who actually played beside him on tour knew something the public never did, that the warmth was performance, that the humor was armor, and that the man wearing that smile had been built in conditions that would have broken most of them before they ever reached the first tee. We have been sold a version of this man built on warmth and charm, the rags to riches immigrant, the lovable underdog from the wrong side of Dallas, the man who proved that golf was for everyone. And there is truth in that story, but there is also a story the tour never wanted told. A story about hustle, deception, financial predation, and a psychological warfare so sharp it ended careers. A story that is only now being fully exposed. If this already changes how you see him, go ahead and use the hype feature and show this video some love, because the deeper story only gets darker. Number 8. Let us start where almost no one starts, with his swing. Critics called it an agrarian method, flat, unorthodox, wrong by every textbook standard the country club set had written. But that swing was not a flaw. It was a weapon built in poverty. Trevino taught himself on dirt tracks and open fields under resource-scarce conditions, and what he developed was not an elegant motion. It was a survival mechanism. He stood with his body aligned well left of the target and shoved the ball outward with a strong blocking action of his left side. The result was a controlled fade, not a pretty swing, a reliable one. A swing that was virtually immune to the psychological tremors of high-stakes play. The hook, that shot that destroys careers under pressure, simply could not happen with this method. It had been engineered out. The country club players had beautiful swings, textbook, coached from childhood by professionals who had never once worried about where their next meal was coming from. Their swings looked right because they had been built in comfort. Trevino's swing looked wrong because it had been built in survival. And on the back nine of a major championship, with everything on the line, survival beats comfort almost every single time. While Jack Nicklaus stood over the ball with the precision of a trained architect, Trevino stood over his with the certainty of a man who had already won before the shot was hit. The swing looked like it came from the wrong background. That was exactly the point. It was designed to outlast everything the elite could throw at him, and it did. Number 7. The gambling culture that built Trevino looked nothing like what we call gambling today. In the 1970s, the men on tour were not corporate brands. They were paycheck-to-paycheck survivors. Players like Dave Hill were walking headlines, constantly clashing with officials, reflecting a tour that was far more volatile and economically raw than anything we see now. The stakes were personal, the losses were felt in the stomach. Today, the conversation about golf and gambling centers on addiction and scandal. John Daly lost over $50 million to high-stakes slot machines and racked up significant debt. Phil Mickelson allegedly wagered $1 billion and became entangled in federal investigations. These men were not predators, they were marks. Trevino understood the difference. He famously never placed a bet in Las Vegas, despite visiting hundreds of times, because he understood one fundamental truth: the house always wins. He only wagered when he had a mathematical or psychological edge over his opponent. He never chased losses. He never played from emotion. By the time his career was finished, he had built a fortune worth approximately $50 million. The same game that swallowed Daly whole made Trevino rich. The difference was discipline. One man gambled for the feeling, the other gambled for the extraction. That is not a small distinction. That is the entire story. One man understood the game beneath the game, the other just wanted the action, and the action always costs you in the end. Number 6. There is a moment in Trevino's career that every sports writer has either softened or ignored: his refusal to compete at Augusta National during his prime years as a 6-time major champion. The man who won the Open Championship, the U.S. Open twice, and the PGA Championship twice, never completed the career Grand Slam. Not because he could not win at Augusta, because he chose not to play. Clifford Roberts, the autocratic chairman of Augusta National, represented the pinnacle of white elitist country club culture. Roberts enforced a racial and social hierarchy where, in his own words, all the golfers would be white and all the waiters and caddies would be black. For Trevino, an American of Mexican descent who had actually been a caddy himself, that environment demanded a level of social subservience he was completely unwilling to provide. He refused to use the club locker room and instead changed his shoes in the parking lot in quiet protest. When the club pushed back, Trevino described Roberts as a dictator and simply stopped showing up during his most dominant years. He surrendered the Grand Slam. He surrendered history. He did it on purpose. He did it on... From his predatory perspective, the validation of Augusta was not worth the price of his autonomy. He transformed their exclusion into a badge of honor. And in doing so, he made one of the loudest statements of class warfare that professional golf has ever witnessed. He did not need their green jacket. He already knew exactly who he was and, more importantly, what he was capable of. Number 5. Everything Trevino said on a golf course was a weapon. Every laugh, every joke, every self-deprecating quip delivered to a gallery eating out of his hand. To the television audience, the Merry Mex was a harmless entertainer who brought life to a stiff sport. To the men standing beside him on the fairway, it was something entirely different. His constant chatter was a form of distraction display, a deliberately designed tool to pull his opponents out of their internal focus and drag them into his world of noise. Players like Tony Jacklin and Jack Nicklaus required a cone of silence to perform their best. They needed internal stillness. Trevino not only refused to provide that stillness, he actively destroyed it. The clearest example came at the 1972 Open Championship at Moorfield. Jacklin, the British hero, was playing with disciplined focus. Trevino was chattering incessantly, acting as though he had already conceded the round after a string of poor shots. On the 17th hole of the final round, Trevino was in a seemingly hopeless position off the green, while Jacklin was safely on in 2. Trevino kept talking. He lowered the tension. He made Jacklin feel safe. Then he holed a chip shot for par from an impossible position. Jacklin, lulled into a state of false security by Trevino's defeated act, was unable to recover. He 3-putted. It broke his resolve. It effectively broke his career. This was not a lucky chip. It was a psychological ambush executed with cold precision. And Trevino had known exactly what he was doing from the moment he opened his mouth on the first tee that morning. Number 4. When Trevino joined the PGA Tour full-time in 1967, the gambling did not stop. It simply moved venues. The Tuesday game was a fixture of tour life, a high-stakes series of practice round matches played in the shadows, kept deliberately hidden from the public, from television cameras, and from corporate sponsors who had been sold a very different image of what the tour was. Companies like Chrysler and American Express were sponsoring what they believed was a gentlemanly pursuit of athletic excellence. The Tuesday game was a brutal exchange of cash that kept many of the era's biggest names financially viable. Lanny Wadkins, Gary Player, Hale Irwin, and Raymond Floyd all participated in this shadow economy. For players in the 1970s who earned comparatively modest tournament checks and had minimal endorsement income, the Tuesday game was not recreation. It was survival. Trevino was a primary architect of this culture. He argued that a practice round without a wager was a waste of time because there was no emphasis, no real pressure on hitting the shot correctly. He favored match play specifically because it allowed him to hit experimental shots into bunkers to test the sand conditions without ruining a stroke play score. He would target younger, less experienced players on tour and win $20 matches that he framed as lessons. He was still extracting, still hunting. The tour leadership viewed the Tuesday game with deep anxiety but could not suppress it because the players, led by Trevino's unapologetic stance, refused to stop. The gap between the tour's public image and its actual culture was enormous. Trevino stood directly in the middle of that gap and refused to move. Number 3. In 1966, the collision between Trevino's street gambling world and the rising superstar class of the PGA Tour happened at Horizon Hills in El Paso. Raymond Floyd was already a qualified tour professional and represented the bold, polished new guard of the sport. He agreed to a 54-hole money match against Trevino, who at the time was a lowly assistant pro. Floyd and his financial backers viewed Trevino as a cartman, as hired help, a social subordinate who could not possibly compete with tour-level talent. The arrogance embedded in that assumption was exactly the opening Trevino needed. Floyd wagered $1,000 of his own money on the match. Trevino was backed by local gambling interests and was paid a flat fee of $100 to act as their man. He was playing with other people's money, which freed him from the psychological weight that would have paralyzed a less experienced operator. Over 3 days, Trevino dismantled Floyd. He won the majority of the stakes, exposed the vulnerability of elite-trained professionals to street-level tactical pressure, and proved that the psychological immunity he had forged in the caddy shacks of Dallas was more durable than anything Floyd had developed on tour. It was the moment the Predator understood his own power. The elite were not invincible. They were just sheltered. They had been playing a game against people who respected the same rules they did. Trevino did not respect those rules. He had never been invited to follow them in the first place. And shelter, it turned out, was a weakness. The moment a man feels safe is the moment he stops watching the door. Trevino was always watching the door. Number 2. After leaving the Marines, where he spent years refining his game in special services, Trevino returned to the municipal golf tracks of Dallas and El Paso. Tennyson Park was the center of the operation, a legendary gambling hub drawing players from across the United States. It was here that Trevino perfected the art of what the gambling world called the fast gun. He was regularly hired by financial backers to play in high-stakes matches as a mercenary. The arrangement gave him a structural advantage most players never have. Because he was playing with other people's money, he could operate with a level of dangerous freedom that his opponents could not match. His tactics were methodical and precise. He would feign ignorance of the handicap system, claiming he had no handicap or was simply a scratch player, while his actual ability was several levels beyond that. He would then agree to give his opponent 4 strokes on the front 9 and 3 on the back, lulling them into a state of overconfident wagering. Then he would shoot a 64 or 65 and render all those strokes mathematically irrelevant. He was winning before the first hole was played. He had won the moment the opponent believed they had secured the advantage. His most notorious tactic was the bottle match. He would wager that he could defeat any opponent while playing exclusively with a 32-ounce adhesive-wrapped Dr. Pepper bottle. He chose the Dr. Pepper bottle over the more commonly used Coca-Cola bottle, specifically because its smoother glass surface provided more consistent contact and better roll. He shot scores as low as 29 for 9 holes using a soda bottle. He was not doing it for entertainment. He was doing it to humiliate, to demonstrate in the most visible possible way that the refined tools and trained etiquette of the opponent meant absolutely nothing against his predatory ingenuity. Number 1. Everything starts here, not on a manicured fairway, not at a country club junior program, in a 3-room shack with no plumbing on the outskirts of Dallas. Trevino was raised by his grandfather, a gravedigger, after his mother left. By the age of 5, he was working in cotton fields. By the age of 8, he had found his way to the Dallas Athletic Club, not as a student of the game, but as a caddy. And in the caddy shack, something formed in him that no coaching program has ever been able to replicate. He learned to bet everything he had earned in a single day against other caddies. He learned what it felt like to play for $5 with only 2 in his pocket. He developed what he later called his killer instinct. Not a metaphor, functional psychological state. A genuine immunity to competitive pressure born from repeated exposure to real financial consequence at an age when most future tour professionals were being driven to practice in station wagons. The stakes of a major championship, the television cameras, the crowds, the history, all of it paled against the visceral pressure of the caddy shack on a Thursday afternoon with money he did not have. From the very beginning, Trevino did not view the golf course as a place of athletic excellence or gentlemanly competition. He viewed it as a venue for wealth transfer. He was not trying to play beautiful golf. He was trying to take money from the person standing across from him. That was the foundation. That was what every tournament win, every hustle, every Tuesday game, every bottle match, every psychological ambush was built on. A child in a shack who learned before he was old enough to drive that the course was a battlefield, and he was already in a war. By the time the establishment got around to calling him a legend, he had already beaten them at a game they did not even know they were playing. The Merry Mex was never a nickname he chose. It was a costume the sport dressed him in, something soft and warm and safe for television. But underneath it was the man from the shack, the gravedigger's grandson, the caddy who played for $5 with 2 in his pocket and never once flinched. The modern era of golf does not produce men like this. It produces athletes managed by sports psychologists and nutritionists, players with guaranteed contracts and global brands, men who have never needed to birdie a hole just to afford a hotel room. The shadow economy of the Tuesday game is gone. The bottle matches at Tennyson Park are history. The tour has been polished into a corporate product, and the Trevino chapter has been sanded down until it gleams. But the reality of what he was, a survivalist predator who infiltrated and financially dismantled an establishment that viewed him as a subordinate, that story does not disappear because it is inconvenient. It stays quiet, underneath all the laughter. And maybe that is the most Trevino thing of all, that even his legacy learned to hustle. That even now, at 85, the truth about him is still hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right person to finally turn it over and look underneath.